Previously on the Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
We learned to embrace despair and fight against hope. You know, that was a phrase that I kind of coined, you know, from my personal experience of, you know, being in prison, being on death row, doing numerous years in solitary confinement. You know, one of the most defining experiences for me is my racial identity. My mother is white. My father is black. I definitely feel responsible for my actions. I don't feel like, you know, I was just I'm an observer as things, you know, were occurring. You know what I'm saying? I was definitely responsible for the things that I did.
It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. I'm Australian, and I'd like to acknowledge our traditional custodians of country where I live and work. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge our continuous connection and contribution to land, sea, and community. What's going on? Well, a lot's going on in the world. 2021 is turning out to be as unpredictable as ever. A lot has changed and is changing really, really quickly. And to that point, well, today I wanted to talk about the prisons that we create for ourselves by the circumstances that happen to us. Sometimes we create the circumstances where we, for reals, like the kids say these days, land up in jail. I think my learning has been that taking responsibility for everything in my life has been the best way for me to not let the victim part of me come out and play. But you know what? I want to give my mother credit here, because whenever I got in trouble, she would first make sure I accepted that it was my fault for being in that situation in the first place. Only after that, she would listen to my detailed and elaborate explanation of why it wasn't my fault to begin with, but just someone misunderstanding me in that instance. You know what? Most of the time I felt that I was innocent, and I would explain that, and I would say that I was innocent. My mom most times would reply, well, why isn't it always not your fault, Ronsley? You know what? I don't know. Well, Rodney Reed can relate to that.
Rodney Reed. He's a black man that has spent 21 years on death row in a Texas prison for a murder he says he did not commit. And in just 8 days, he's scheduled to be executed unless Texas Governor Greg Abbott listens to the growing chorus of people asking to stop it. And our Marcus Moore is on the ground in Dallas with the latest. Marcus, you know, it is very scary to think that a man could be killed in 8 days if he's actually innocent. Can you just remind us of what this case is all about?
Well, Kimberly, good to be with you this morning. First of all, this is a case that's been getting so much attention. Rodney Reed, a 51-year-old man on death row right now here in Texas, convicted for the murder of a 19-year-old girl, Stacy Stites. This happened in Bastrop, Texas, which is a town about 45 minutes east of the Texas capital of Austin. She was found in April of 1996, brutally murdered along the side of the road. Prosecutors and authorities said that she had been strangled, and early on, there were two prime suspects in this case. Stites' fiance at the time, Jimmy Fennell, and then Rodney Reed, who is someone she was having a secret relationship with, an affair with. And Reed is the one who ended up being convicted of the murder. And if you go online right now, Kimberly, all you have to do is type in Rodney Reed and you get a plethora of pictures and articles about this story that, as you said, has been gaining in momentum in terms of attention, and the calls for Reed for his execution to either be stayed or for him to get a reprieve. And we're talking about people, celebrities, and also lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that have been calling for the governor to issue an order for there to be another look at this case.
Yeah, you're right. An outpouring of bipartisan support from Beyonce all the way to Ted Cruz. But if they're unsure, why can't they just stop and do a new trial until they're certain? I mean, this is a man's life.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot at stake here, Kimberly, and it will just have to go through the process. I mean, it's up to the governor to decide whether or not this execution will move forward. And certainly attorneys on both sides of this have their views.
So that's the story about Rodney Reed. You notice that towards the end, he says that we can't really save someone's life because we have to follow the process. And that process can be revoked by only one person. Doesn't feel quite right, does it? Well, a lot of times we get caught in this situation where we feel like we are innocent, right? Well, today we are talking with Terry Robinson, also called Shanton. I'll refer to him as Shanton, but before we even begin, I want you to know the most important piece of this story.
I am currently fighting a wrongful conviction. And it's not something that I say lightly because I understand the stigma in institutions behind behind claims of innocence. But that doesn't take away from the fact that throughout my life, I have engaged in a lot of poor choices and a lot of ill behavior. I was a criminal. I did sell drugs. At 17 years old, the charge that I was locked up for was snatching a woman's pocketbook. Like I had learned from this older guy, like this is the quick way to make money, and I was so naive. I was so, I guess, infatuated and influenced by this person that I tried my hand, and it certainly did work for me. And I'm glad because that was like the end of my pocketbook snatching days. But looking back over my life, I am accountable for a lot of things that I wish I could take back now. But I chalk a lot of it up to the human error and the human circumstance. I mean, we are human. We are prone to error. And unfortunately, a lot of times that includes criminal behavior.
So Shanton maintains that he is innocent. I wonder if you cared. I did. But about what it was like to be imprisoned, even though innocent, and what life was like on death row. I wanted to know what the day looked like. I wanted to know that because I asked all the entrepreneurs on this show what their morning routine looked like. So, Shanton, what is your morning routine?
So, a day here on death row, that's a reoccurring question that I always get. And it's interesting because you think that, like, that, of course, incarceration, it comes with a lot of repetitiveness, you know. And so you would think that the answer would kind of be the same. But unfortunately, like, just being incarcerated, especially in a place like death row, there is a different experience every day. And it starts with you just, like, being grateful, for myself anyway, being grateful just to wake up. Like, after having been on death row for 20 years, there's just this immediate gratefulness and gratitude to be able to draw that first breath of life in the morning. And then some mornings things vary. Sometimes we wake up a little agitated. Depends on if an officer comes and wakes us out of our sleep for count time, or if some guys are up early and they're drinking coffee and really stoked and they make a lot of noise. They can kind of jar you out of your sleep. But usually when I get up, I try to find this a long time. Within the first hour, I try to find at least 15 minutes or so to meditate. And I have found that is really important in how my day goes from there. And then we usually have, since we've had the restrictions, we haven't been able to occupy our cafeteria. So they feed us here on the block. So they usually come around with the trays in the morning. And then after the trays, anyone who is still kind of just walking around with that lingering sleep effect on, they usually kind of snap out of it after breakfast, and it can get really noisy here. So I think the rest of my day is kind of filled with just kind of ducking and dodging, trying to. A prison can be really distracting, you know. And if you are into things constructive like reading or writing essays or memoirs or writing a book, Like, you really have to jock for that time. But I do try to find time throughout the day to attend to my community, because I think that's important. So maybe once or twice a day for about an hour, I try to get a chess game or two in. Sometimes there's a really good TV program, and it involves some TV watching, but the majority of my day is kind of really spent in and out of my cell, just trying to find and appreciate that alone time.
Did you know the average time between sentencing and execution for people in the US on death row has been increasing over the years? In 1990, the average time between sentencing and execution sat around 7 years. In 2018, that number had climbed to an average of almost 20 years. This has sparked a debate over whether it's fair to double punish someone with prolonged solitary confinement as well as death.
Do you know what it's like for an innocent person to be orientated into the prison system? I don't think it was fair of me to ask Shanton to relive that day, but he did.
Yeah, I mean, especially for someone who is entering into the prison system for the first time, it is the scariest feeling in the world. Because I honestly didn't know if I would make it. Like, I thought that I was like entering into the last days of my life, and I couldn't see. And I only had like a 2-year prison sentence for a felony common law robbery. It was back then we had this sentencing circumstances that would cut most times in half. So my 2 years would cut to a year, but for me it just felt like forever. And like we had to strip all of our clothes, and I'm 17. I'm looking at these other guys, and some of them are my age. Some of them look younger. Some of them seem like they were veterans. Like, they just kind of disrobed and just kind of stood in this line. I just felt so degraded, like, because I had never experienced anything to that magnitude. And then they kind of sprayed us with this solution for life, and immediately once you step inside of the prison room, you lose your sense of liberty. Like, from the time you step in, there's rules, and they have no issues or no problem whatsoever enforcing those rules from the time you step in. So for me, it was the scariest ordeal that I could have possibly faced at 17 years old.
Okay, back to the topic about being innocent on death row. Louisiana prosecutor Marty Strode tried 34-year-old Glenn Ford for the armed robbery and murder of Isidore Roseman, an elderly jeweler for whom Ford did yard work. Ford, father of 2 with another child on the way, was convicted by an all-white jury and sentenced to death. He spent 30 years in solitary confinement on death row in the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola before evidence came to light in 2013, proving his innocence.
Well, Mr. Ford, our paths crossed, as you know, many years ago. I was a young prosecutor, and you were sitting in jail, a much younger man. I was one of the individuals who was, on behalf of the state of Louisiana, that was trying the case against you in which the state of Louisiana was seeking the death penalty. You must have felt numb back then, because the lawyers you had were well-intended, but they didn't have any experience. It was an all-white jury. You must have felt awful alone in that courtroom. The case was tried and you were found guilty. It must have been a horrible feeling. And thereafter, the jury, which was composed of an all-white jury, sentenced you to death.
The reason I bring all this up is because we try to be perfect, but life isn't fair to us. We get caught up in being the victim and we forget to be grateful. I suppose, I don't know, this whole rant, Shanton, makes any sense, but man, are you grateful? Do you feel grateful at all?
I mean, I do. So I'm grateful. I'm also fascinated when I hear people speak about how well I articulate or how I've expressed because I don't really see myself that way. I've always struggled with any kind of praise, but I do feel that it is important to express accurately, like the things that I want, because now I've taken on a new journey. And I feel that I'm embarking on this opportunity to awaken and bring awareness to other kids and other guys who are like myself. And so now I speak with a little more emphasis. I speak a little more with more confidence, because I know I'm not only speaking for myself anymore. I'm speaking for all the people who have been wrongfully convicted, all the people who do want to take accountability for the things in their life and who they are. And so when my journey became bigger than myself, and I think it started to show in my definition, in the way I talk.
You know, I say this a lot on the show. I believe that mothers are the original entrepreneurs. They do what is needed to be done for the best of their children, and they become who they need to become, whether it's the chef, the driver, the caregiver, the hug giver, the therapist, the everything, the tutor, to get the best out of their children. And in most instances that happens. I know that there are exceptions, and I don't want to disrespect those instances, but I know that the older I get, the more I appreciate my mother.
Shout out to all the mothers who just have risen to the occasion and have kind of filled their space. A lot of mothers take on their mother and father role, like my mom herself. And all the life's lessons that mothers teach and that they give us, they help us and prepare us in life. And so, yeah, there's certainly dignity in responsibility. I was fortunate. I certainly came from a tremendously great woman. Like, she was just so big on rearing, and I learned more from her. Like, I am a reflection of her today in all the things that she taught me. And that's not to say that she condoned some of my poor behavior. That's just part of the human error. That's just me being a knucklehead and trying to figure things out in life. I mean, I got to a point where I was a young adolescent, and I just kind of needed my father. And if not him, then certainly a prominent and a real recurring male figure. And it just wasn't. All my role models were in the streets. My older brother, who was only 2 years older than me, he was part of that cycle. He was my role model. And so he started engaging in a lot of just poor choices in life. But there was a time when my mom she did become the enemy, because she was the disciplinary. She couldn't fill that role that I needed from a father, but she tried. And then later in life, when I was about 13 or 14, I used to really, I don't want to use this word, but I use it loosely, but it's really how I felt at the time. Like, I just couldn't stand her. I hated my mom. I thought that she was just standing in the way of my maturity, and I wanted to be older, and I wanted to hang out later, and I was into girls, and I didn't know how to come to her with these things. And so she just kind of represented this wall that just stood in between me and my advancement. But now I look back and I realize that she was taking the brunt of my anger and all the negative things that I inflicted at the time, so that my father wouldn't have to. And so in that way, she kind of established my relationship with my father. I still have a decent relationship with my father, but I've learned to really adore and respect my mom for all the sacrifices that she's made. Even putting herself in the line of fire for my adolescent, because I was like really angry. I was an angry kid. I really was. But now, me and my mom have the best relationship, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing I can't talk to her about. And so I'm thankful in that way.
When we come back, being innocent on death row and how to reconcile that within yourself.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Our aim with this audio documentary has always been to build a strong community of entrepreneurs and creatives to provide a space where they can use their voice to share their authenticity with the world. As a valued listener, your voice matters too. We love to hear your feedback and ideas, so don't be shy to let us know how we're doing in the ratings and comments. If you have a message for our production team or know someone who would be a perfect fit as a guest, You can find out more information on how to share your input at psychologyoфentrepreneurship.com.
Welcome back. So, did you ever wonder how our lives are just like death row? Crazy comparison, but bear with me. Because when you think about it, you don't know when you are going to die. You, me, everyone creates boundaries that we don't cross and live in prisons of our own, I suppose. Sometimes those prisons consume us. What would you be like if you were innocent and on death row? What would you become? And before you answer, I would like you to think about the easy environment we have as opposed to someone in prison. But here's what I really, really want you to hear.
I am. I mean, that's part of the journey, and I am a work in progress. I really am. Some days I wake up and man, it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle to get to that point where I am okay, because I'm not always okay. I have kids that I'm not able to be a part of their life. I have a mother who is growing elderly, and like I know each second of each day matters, and so I'm not always okay. But I have become practical. You know, I've learned the tools to become okay, even when I don't always start out that way. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. I've learned to love myself unconditionally, in spite of my flaws. Aspect of life that to me is always kind of difficult to express, because sometimes I look at death row as just another hardship. It is hardship. It's a different hardship than a lot of people face, but it is hardship nonetheless. And in that regard, I think we all have a death row. We all have this adverse situation in our life, whether it's a bill that needs to be paid or whether it's this relationship that's kind of going haywire. We all have this thing that's just kind of going terribly wrong in our life. Unfortunately for death row, it's that magnitude is like on 10 or on 100, but it's still hardship nonetheless. What I struggle with is how death row can teach me to be grateful for the next day and grateful for life. Because when I was out in the world and I was a part of this hardship, these different variety, these different angles of hardship that was kind of coming at me, I was so distracted that I wasn't always gratitude. I wasn't always grateful just to be alive. And if nothing else, death row teaches us to be grateful, like just to be so just over the hills with this gratefulness and this dignity, just to be able to exist and last 21 years. I've been here 21 years now. There's guys here who haven't, who was here 10 years, and they were executed. And I knew one guy who was here 5 years. And I remember talking to him, and he was telling me, I'm on my last stages of my appeals, and I'm thinking, well, this other guy's got 20 years in and 15, and so he got some time. But the next year, he lost his appeals, and they executed him a little over 5 years after he was here. So for me to be able to wake up 21 years, I think that's one of the key elements. That's the essential tool to being okay. Just knowing that I am still here, that I am still alive, and as long as I'm alive, I can still fight. So gratitude is certainly one of those tools. I've learned to be a lot more humble. Like humility is huge in my life today. I mean, I wasn't always the best person with conflict resolve. I didn't have a lot of good skills in resolving conflict, and today I practice that all the time, especially in a place like here, like death row. So there's just some social building skills that I've worked on over the years that I'm still a work in progress. Like, it's not that I don't still get frustrated or angry or agitated, but at the forefront of a lot of my decisions is empathy. I've learned that if I put myself in the place of this person, just put myself in their shoes for 1 minute and then kind of imagine what it's like for them on the other side, facing me and dealing with me and the way they talk. And it kind of helps me to empathize. And
being a work in progress is not taking yourself too seriously, not judging yourself, not judging others, not gossiping about others. And by the way, that includes people on television you've never met. I'm sure they'd want me to tell you that they don't really want you to care about their lives either and what they do. But books. You know, I love the power of books. Nice segue, Ronsley. Shanton, What was the first book you read in prison?
When I was about 17, it was my first stint on prison to the place called High Rise, and I was like a nervous wreck. Like, this is prison, and I'm here, and I just went through the orientation process, and like I'm still kind of trying to fathom what the next months and years will be like for me. And I was just like, I was just all over the place. And I walked inside of this room, and there was this book. It was called We're All Doing Time. It was by a guy named Bo Lozoff. And there was nothing else in the room, no mattress, no other books, no pamphlets, nothing to distract me, just this one book. And I picked it up and I read it. And it was all about meditation. It was all about inclusiveness. And that book got me through my first night in prison when I was 17 years old. And so later, some years since I've been here on death row, the instructor and the host who was presiding over the mindfulness class turned out to be Bo Lozoff's wife. Her name was Cedar Lozoff. And like, she's like a guru when it comes to meditation. And she just taught us so many things that, so many techniques. Because before her, I would be like frustrated with the meditation because I couldn't avoid the distraction. I couldn't keep my mind from kind of deviating. And I didn't know that was part of the process. But it is a practical process, and the more that you do it, then the more you learn to kind of stabilize your mind and your thoughts. And for me, my vision is just this ocean front, like with this horizon that leads off to nowhere. And like you, I hear birds chirping, I hear the waves crashing, and it just puts me in this place where I'm really in tune with myself.
Cedar and Bo Lozoff are the founders of the Human Kindness Foundation, whose primary work is a prison ashram project. This project encourages people who are incarcerated to use their time for focused spiritual growth through free resources provided within prisons. We're All Doing Time was Bo's first book, published in 1989, and continues to be requested by hundreds of inmates on a weekly basis.
So, I'm curious, dude, what's been the happiest day of your life in prison?
I think that the happiest that I've been here in all of these 21 years, there was a time when my daughter, who I wrote about in the essay, she and her mother had came to see me and visit. And I hadn't seen her mom in 17 years. I mean, the last I had heard from her, she called me that one day. There was this phone call that didn't go well for, I imagine, for either of us. It certainly didn't go well for me. And I had went to prison for that and returned to society, and then was here on death row for some years. And so my daughter reconnected with my mother. Then she made an effort to reconnect with me. My mom brought her here for a visit once or twice, and I think from the sidelines, I think my daughter's mother could just see the effort that I was making. Like, I didn't exude the behavior of a person who was guilty of such an atrocious thing, like child abuse or sex offense. So I don't know what made her kind of let down her guards, but I do know that she wrote me and asked if she could come and visit me. And like, there was just all of this. It was so much going on. Like, I hadn't seen her in 17 years, and up to that point, she was the person that I hated the most because of what was done to me. And I didn't know how to allow her back into my life. I didn't know how to fix things between us. But I knew that she and I would always have that with each other, that we share a daughter together. And I know that we owed it to each other to at least be in that same space. And I was never afraid to face her because I had nothing to hide. And so I did extend that invitation. She came to see me, and just seeing my daughter and her mother together, and we were just kind of in this, it brought back some memories of when she and I were together before all the controversy. And it was the first time my daughter had seen her father and her mom together in the same setting. And I think she and I just both knew that we just owed her more than that. Like, I had so many questions I wanted to ask her about what happened. I was so vindictive and so angry. But just seeing her and seeing my daughter and seeing what it meant to them, then I realized that there are things in life more important than our wants or even our needs. And I was willing to put all that aside for what I felt like my daughter needed at the time. And I was happy. Like I left visit that day, and there was no ill will towards the daughter's mother or anything that had happened. I just kind of let it go. So that was the happiest I've been, that moment when I finally just let it go.
The happiest I've ever been is the moment when I finally just let go. What prison are you living in? And can you finally just let go? While you're contemplating that, want to know how meditation actually helps an inmate on death row? Well, so did I.
So for me, it's really gratifying because I have over the years, and I still am learning things about myself that I would have never gathered had I not learned to pay attention. Like, a lot of my life was kind of really this like this stimulus output, like just kind of looking out at life and observing. And I was always just like this voice inside my head that kind of that I kind of turned to. But for a lot of years, I had lost sight of it, and where I was really an internal person, I became so external and so involved in my surroundings, my peers, my reputation, all those different things, and I just lost sight of who I am. And so I have found that during meditation, it kind of really helps me to like draw in on this, just this really personal moment in this space, and I'm forced to kind of face who I am, the things I've done in life, where I want to go, some of my achievements and the things that I've yet to achieve. And all of those things take place within a matter of those 15 minutes. And a lot of times it's enough to just kind of invoke in me for the rest of the day this energy that I need to kind of get through a really tough time on death row.
Hey, Shanton, I loved our chat. But before we go, is there anything you'd wish people knew about you before they met you?
That I care. Like I'm quick to put people's needs ahead of my own. That's something I learned from my mother. My mom is a nurturer, and she loves taking care of people. And I'm proud that I inherit that from her. So I do care about people. And that's not to say anything about guilt or innocence or why I'm here and why I'm not here. But it's believed that a person is deceased today and gone from this world because I didn't care. And I always wonder about the people who will inherit to that idea that I just don't care. I love people. I love helping people. And I would never harm anyone as opposed to helping them. So the one thing I would want people to know is that I care tremendously about people.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Coming up on the Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
I'm Tessie Castillo. I'm a journalist and co-author of Crimson Letters, Voices from Death Row. The political change happens when activists try really hard to petition for it. So there were years and years and years of activists who were pressuring the prison to install phones. When I was teaching my class at Central Prison, there were two people who had been involved in some kind of a robbery that had ended in a murder. And in both cases, they got the death penalty as the accomplices, while the actual shooter, the one who did the killing, did not get the death penalty.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Terry Robinson, also known as Shanton, because he has been incarcerated on North Carolina's death row for 20 years. He maintains that he's innocent of the 1999 robbery/murder that landed him on death row, and he is a moving speaker on what it is like to serve time in prison. Shanton gives the most vulnerable answers to questions about his personal life, day-to-day life on death row, and really his search for inner peace despite his circumstances. He is currently working on an urban fantasy novel and his memoir, but his writings can be found on the blog at walkinginthoseShoes.com/author/Shandon. Those links will be in the show notes at psychologyoфentrepreneurship.com.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bonnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research by Jenna Elliott. Content by Corinne Castles. Project managed by the legend that is Kaylee Bonnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and way to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Love the polished audio docuseries style of this podcast, The Psychology of Entrepreneurship? At We Are Podcast, you can learn how to create a similar style for your own show. This revolutionary virtual event assembles podcasters, entrepreneurs, and marketers in one spot, so you're able to learn from the masters. Head straight to wearepodcast.com to reserve your spot at our next event.